people felt darkness. People felt the cold, chill. Kind of like this morning, yes. But it is kind of like this morning, because as we draw near to that blessed Christmas day, as we draw near to December 25th, as we draw near, we also draw near to colder times. We also draw near darker days, right? The days get dark sooner and they last longer. And that spiritually, me too, Miss Julie, that spiritually is a metaphor, a picture of what was going on in Isaiah's day. He was dealing with a nation that had become increasingly deaf to the cries of the prophets to repent, to come back to Him. Does anybody like this kind of weather? The gray. We drove up yesterday, it was gray. It was cold. You know, even when it's light, it was kind of depressing, oppressive. If you'll get a picture of that, if you will let that sink down into your soul, if you'll understand that Advent and Christmas is all about the light of God, the light of the world coming in to a darkened place. Isaiah said, "The people who have dwelt in a land of darkness have seen a great light." In The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, in the Chronicles of Narnia, you hear this statement from Tumnus. He said, "In Narnia, it's always winter. It's been winter for ever so long. It's always winter, but never Christmas." The good news is Christmas. The good news is there's a difference while we light the pink candle on the third Sunday of Advent, the Advent Sunday that is joy. Because you have hope and you have peace, and those are things that you're looking toward, right? But as you're looking toward the coming of the Messiah, you have joy because of His coming, right? We talked about that this morning, because of what God is doing, what God has done, what God will do. In the waiting, we can worship. In the darkness, we have the light of the world shining as a revelatory promise to us. So darkness is not a foregone conclusion. This depression that we experience every winter is not the end. We want to look to Psalm 30 this morning. The sweet psalmist of Israel, David, writes of this seasonal change in his life, as it was in the bigger picture of Israel, as it is in yours and my life, as it is in the bigger picture of all humanity. Let's read starting in verse 5. This is a verse very familiar to most of you. He says, "For His anger is but for a moment. His favor is for life. Weeping may endure for a night, but what? Joy comes in the morning." And that isn't that like Christmas? You have to slog through the shortened days, the cold days, the dark days. You slog through, you get through those, because there is a day coming, a Christmas morning. Anybody remember Christmas mornings as a kid when you would wake up and there was such joy and anticipation when you went to bed Christmas Eve and you woke up and there was like, right? You would bound out of bed, right? Because you had that joy of the presence. We have the joy of the presence. And we should bound out of bed because of His joy. The joy that, what we said, it was immortal gladness. The giver of immortal gladness. His anger lasts but for a moment, but His favor is for life. He makes that positional statement here. David makes that positional statement as a foundation for his life. Have you come to know some truth in life, and then you stake your tent in that truth. There's some things that you believe you can't be shaken from, you can't be moved from, because they are true. They are principled truths that you have to cast your lot in with. You have to put all your eggs in that basket. That is what this is for David. In this statement, he compares and he contrasts four different things that I see. And in comparing and contrasting these things, he gives us an illumination. You know, like when we were driving up yesterday and it was all gray, when we left in the morning it was foggy, you couldn't make out anything because it was just one big gray blob. Life is like that. But as you have contrast, as you can see the dividing lines and you can make out shapes, then you start to understand the picture of what's going on. This is what David is doing in this first verse. First thing he says, he equates darkness with weeping. Darkness with weeping. And then he compares joy with light. If you have that seasonal affective disorder like I do, when days are gray and wet. When I lived in London, when I first moved to London, the first time I'd been away from home, 19 years old, I lived in London in this little flat, little town called Pinner, and it was November. And if you want to know what England is like in November, it's like it was. It's like it's been the past couple of weeks. It's been 30 to 40 degrees and damp and foggy. Now, when you're by yourself, and when you wake up, it's like that. When you go to bed, it's like that. And that's all you experience, I got depressed. But once the sun comes out and you can start to see shapes and forms and colors, it does something to you. And so as you look at this verse, you see there is darkness and there's weeping that goes along with the darkness. There is joy and there is light that produces that joy. The light of God gives us clarity. The light of God gives us the ability to see things. And then he says, there's a contrast between weeping and joy. We all know that, right? We've all been in times of weeping. We've all been in times of joy. I don't know which one you want to choose, but I want to choose the joy. And then there's a contrast between God's favor and His anger. Between God's favor and His anger. Now, God loves us with an everlasting love. True? Do you ever get angry with your kids? Absolutely. It's not because you don't love them, it's because you do love them. Right? You want the best for them. God wants the best for us, and sometimes He has to get angry with us. He has to correct us. He has to direct us. And sometimes the darkness is a result of our disobedience. Then he draws the fleeting season of God's corrective anger. Right? The contrast between the fleeting season of God's corrective anger to His favor that lasts a lifetime. You see, the things we go through in life that are those dark seasons of life, they seem like they never end, but they are only but for a moment. When we enter into the glory of eternity, the things that we go through in this life will seem small in comparison to the eternal weight of His glory. I know they seem big now, and they are now. But in contrast and comparison to His eternal favor, these things will pale in comparison. And then he draws a distinct correlation. This is a correlation, not a contrast, but a correlation. The line leading from His anger forward to our weeping. Right? And then he draws a line leading from His favor to our joy. A line leading from His anger to our weeping, and then a line leading from His favor to our joy. There's a direct correlation between the two. Do your kids like you being upset with Him? No. We don't like God being upset with us. We don't earn His favor by works. but we can diminish his favor, our experience of his favor, right? He's still favoring us, but in a corrective way. Now, why does David make this foundational statement? Why does he unpack this in Psalm 30, verse 5? Why does he tell us this? Well, because in times past, David stood on his prosperity for his enjoyment and his confidence. Look again in verses 6 and 7a, if you will. David speaking again, he says, "Now in my prosperity I said, I shall never be moved. Lord, by your favor, you have made my mountain stand strong. I shall never be moved. By your favor, you made my mountain stand strong." Now, this is subtle, but there's a real tell in these verses here. They're subtle, but very real tell. David said, "In my prosperity, I said, I shall not be moved." Right? In my prosperity, I said, I shall not be moved. I said past tense, right? This is what I used to believe when I was prosperous and everything was going my way. Have you ever felt like that? Like I am so, my relationship with God is so strong and everything is going so well that this is how it's going to be forever. That's what David thought. But he made a subtle shift from the Lord to his prosperity and his confidence in his prosperity. You have made my mountain, my kingdom, everything that you've given me, it's mine, right? You've given it, but it's mine now. You see the little shift he made here? Even though he recognized God's favor, it seems to be that he had a prideful possessiveness to God's blessing. You hear that same favor or that same tone in the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. The Pharisee, where was he at? The Pharisee was at the temple, right? It looked like he was a Pharisee. He looked good. But in his prayer, praying thus with himself, he said, "God, I thank you that I am not like this tax collector and these other men." You hear that prideful possessiveness. I thank you that I am all this in a bag of chips. My mountain shall never be moved. Then you hear that prideful possessiveness another time in the parable of the man who had too many possessions. And he's like, "What am I going to do with all this grain? I'm running out of barn space. I know what I'll do. Build another barn." And the Lord said, "You fool, this night your soul will be required of you." Right? Enjoying the blessing of God and then maybe even thanking God, but not understanding that it is only by God's grace. It is not yours to do with what you want. But David did not understand that. There was a time when he said, I shall never be moved. I said, look at all this I have. Remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar too when he went out and said, look at this kingdom, right? Look at how great I am. That's kind of what happened to David, except he didn't eat the grass. Remember I said it was a past position that David had held. He said, I said, past tense. Not I say, but I said. So what could happen that would change a man from such certainty, from such a rock-solid position? What could change a person from that? What could move him when he said, I will never be moved, I shall not be moved? What could move somebody to a place off of that position? Well, let's read on, verses 7b through 9. He says, Lord, by your favor you have made my mountain stand strong, but you hid your face, and I was troubled. I cried out to you, O Lord, and to the Lord I made supplication. I made a personal request to you, Lord. What profit is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it declare your truth? You see, David realized when the favor of the Lord was turned away from him. There was a time in my life, probably multiple times, but one specific time when I was backslidden. Everything started to go our way. Right? We were newly married. I had a 6-month-old son. I had the job that I had dreamed of, that only God could have provided and did. But I got to a point in my life when everything was going fine, but I had left my first love. And I realized that, and I felt it in my soul. And I said to God, I don't know how to get back to where I was, but I'm not where I want to be. Right? I miss our relationship. I think that's how David must have felt, at least the way I can understand it. From standing strong to I was troubled in one verse. He had the light of his joy in one moment, enjoyment in his possessions, right? Enjoyment, you hear that word? From losing the joy. The joy was not in his possessions, the joy was in his relationship. And when that relationship was severed, not severed, but distanced, David felt what truly gave him the joy that comes in the morning. His joy had turned to weeping, had turned to night. David probably recounted the blessing that the priest gave to Israel. And Doug's very familiar with this in Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. The Lord bless you and the Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and give you peace. Right? Somehow David felt like the Lord had turned his face away. The favor of God was not looking upon him. He felt it in his soul. He felt it in his bones. And the Lord felt like to David that the Lord had ceased to lift up his countenance, and he had no peace. So he lost his confidence. The confidence he had in verse 5, he had lost. The joy he had in verse 5, it was gone. And now he had a new perspective. Right? He went from standing rock solid on this position to being shaken, not stirred. Now he was wavering because he didn't know he was reeling. What is going on? But even when he made this request, he prays to God. What profit is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it declare your truth? Even in that prayer, I hear David saying, I am too valuable for you to lose from your team. What difference is it going to make to you, God? You're not going to gain anything if I perish. You're not going to benefit anything, right? I am a benefit to you. Who's going to be here to praise you? Who's going to be here to proclaim your truth if I'm not here? Do you hear the slight arrogance in that? I am such a good team player. You can't afford to lose me. Have you ever felt irreplaceable at work? Then they replace you. And you realize you're not as irreplaceable as you thought. Well, David realized, he thought that he was irreplaceable. He was the king, right? He was the man after God's own heart. He was the one that God had exalted. And he forgot who had lifted him up to that position. He thought it was because of his wisdom and his power and his strength that somehow he had arrived at a place that God could not afford to lose. And if I'm not around to praise you, who's going to praise you? If I'm not around to teach sinners your way, who's going to do it? God, I'm sure, just shaking his head. Son. So David came to realize that his position, his strength in his position, was only as strong as the object of his faith. Right? His position was only as strong as the object of his faith. Right? His position was before, I am strong because of my possessions. I am strong because of my position. Even though I understand that God gave it to me, now it's my kingdom. Right? It's my mountain. I'm not moving anywhere. Right? Now that you've given me all this, I'm rooted. I'm grounded. I'm stable. Until he wasn't. And then even in his prayer, it sounded a little self-serving, a little self-sufficient. Until he came to verse 10. Hear, O Lord, and have mercy on me. Lord, be my helper. Do you see the subtle shift? Mercy is not the same as what he had just been expounding. Before, he didn't sound like he needed mercy. It sounded like mercy needed him, right? God, you need me on your team. But mercy is not deserved. Can I get an amen? Otherwise, it would not be called mercy. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. Right? God holds back. And David's saying, hold back all this I'm feeling. Remove this cloud of darkness from me. Remove my depression from me. I don't deserve it, Lord. I have been arrogant. I have been self-serving. I've depended on things that were good and in your giving, but they were not you. So in darkness and brokenness, David shifted his focus to the light of the Lord's mercy. Right? His focus was on his stuff, his kingdom. Now he had shifted his focus to God. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. You hear that from the tax collector at the temple. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I have broken your law, Lord. I have depended on other things. I have been an idolater in my faith. And so I need your mercy. It is not deserved. I can't earn it, but I need it. Mercy is based on God's nature and his love for us. Full stop, end of story. Mic drop. No longer was it, God, you should forgive me. You should restore to me the joy of my salvation because you can't afford to lose me, to, I know I don't deserve it. Mercy. That's the only word I've got that's coming to mind. Mercy, Lord. Mercy. End of argument. I'm not going to state my position. I'm just going to ask for mercy. But you remember that first verse? Weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. He went from life and joy, or enjoying his possessions, to darkness and mourning, mourning. But it was through that darkness, that mourning of soul, that dark night of the soul, that morning came. mourning, the light of the world. Right? God started to turn his face back to David, said, okay, now that we understand each other, now that we're on proper foundational terms, now we can start to have that restored relationship. I didn't change. David, you changed. And now that you have turned back to me, we can keep walking together. How, Amos says, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? You can't have a different position from God and walk with him. And David found that out. You have turned from me, verse 11, you have turned from me my mourning into dancing. Again, drawing this contrast. Have you ever just sat down in the sackcloth and ashes of life? Throwing dust on your head, just mourning? And then one day, all of a sudden, joy springs up. There's a song I like called Blue Skies. You know, sometimes it seems like life is all gray, all cloudy, all cold, all dark, all damp, and then all of a sudden in springtime the sun comes out. You know, and your soul just leaps on the inside, right? You walk outside and you just feel different. When God starts to show his favor into your life, when God turns his countenance to you, when you are walking in agreement with him, when you're not quenching the spirit, when you are walking in spirit and in truth, when you are in right relationship with God, there is that immortal gladness. There is that joy unspeakable. I can't explain it. I can't make you feel it. But it's real nonetheless. David said, I've had both, and I prefer the joy of the Lord. Then we're going to get into Nehemiah in a few weeks. And Nehemiah makes a statement. When they come to the temple and they realize they have broken the covenants of God, they hear the law and they understand that they are guilty. They are sinners. Nehemiah makes this statement. He says, do not weep, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Right? God is not against us. He is for us. But to be for us, we have to walk in his truth. And when I feel that darkness, that heaviness of night and soul, it is not because God is against me. It's because I have turned my back on him sometimes. Sometimes it happens because God just wants to show us what it means to know the life without him. Have you ever been living in such a long period of peace that you forgot what chaos was like? You will. Well, and on the flip side of that, if you have lived in a long season of chaos, sometimes you forget what peace is like. You forget to believe that there is something outside of the chaos. And it's in that contrast, when we understand both, right, we can see the light of the Lord more clearly. We can see life abundant and eternal. We can see what God has for us. That is not seen by the eyes, heard by the ears, nor touched or tasted or felt in the physical, but it is revealed by the Spirit of God. And in that revelation, we understand. You have turned from me my mourning into dancing. You have put off my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness. And to that end, that my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. When he says, my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent, he's not saying, well, look how glorious I am. He's saying that everything that you've given me is pointed back to you, right? Everything that makes me of any consequence is of you, right? Apart from you, I can do nothing. But in you, I am more than a conqueror, right? In you, I have joy, peace, life, and wholeness. And apart from you, I have nothing. And so I'm going to take all of that you've given me and I'm going to give you praise for every bit of it. I'm going to lift it all to you in a sacrifice, right? I'm not just giving you a tenth. It's all yours, Lord. I have nothing.